3 races left and a sprint race in the 2024 F1 season. And just so happens there are 3 constructors in the hunt for the Constructors Championship. You have McLaren in first place, Ferrari in second, Red Bull in third. I'll go ahead for Mercedes fans right now. Mercedes, you can't get out of fourth. I'm sorry, that's where you are. But we're going to get into these top 3 and kind of project where we see these next 3 Grand Prix races going. This is Turn 1. We're your host, Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
So as I mentioned, McLaren, Ferrari, and Red Bull. Right now, McLaren is at 593 in constructors' points, Ferrari 557, and Red Bull 554. We did the math, folks. If your drivers take home first place, second place, and the fastest lap in the remaining 3 races and sprint race, there's 140 points left on the table, which means really anything could happen over these next 3 Grand Prix.
Unless you're Mercedes.
Unless you're Mercedes, which again, yeah, you are fourth.
Red Bull could get 0 points the rest of the season, and y'all could get 1, 2, and the fastest lap and everything. Nothing.
Maybe it helps your driver standings. Maybe you get some kind of bonus out of that or incentives. I don't know. Maybe your sponsors require you to race in all the races. I don't know.
I'm not dissing on Mercedes. I'm a Mercedes fan. I'm just as hurt as y'all are, but it's reality.
Okay, so we talked about earlier in the week, and I'll link that video, the Drivers' Championship, how it's essentially over with Max winning here in Sao Paulo. There's still some points on the table. Maybe some chaos could happen. Don't really see that happening. The constructors battle is where it's at, though. We started off the season with Red Bull. Not 2023 levels of performance like we saw, because Max was winning, but Sergio was not coming in second every single race. But then about middle of the season, maybe races 10 through 13, somewhere in there, something switched for both McLaren and Ferrari teams to where they just went to a whole other level over Red Bull. What are your thoughts on kind of that mix-up between the constructors?
We see Red Bull dominating, and again, we're thinking, oh, it's 2023 all over again, but this time minus Sergio Perez. And Max is going to run away, get his 4th title, which he probably still will, even now statistically. But the battle isn't with the drivers' standings, the drivers and the constructors. And we see this huge incline from McLaren and Ferrari. I don't know if they brought crazy upgrades, which they probably did. And then on top of that, you add the fact that 1, Oscar Piastri is getting way more comfortable with his car. And 2, the confidence level after Lando Norris won in Miami surges him to the top to where he's now a top performing driver. And you get that mix up with Lando seeing that he has the possibility to win a driver's championship. That fire culminates in a massive battle for the drivers, but also for the constructors as McLaren comes back and takes the lead from Red Bull. But Ferrari isn't necessarily just, oh, they passed us and then, oh, we're just going to stay back here. No, they're bringing the battle back. We're seeing Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz both deliver some insane races. They both have multiple wins on the season, and they're fighting for every dear point. As we saw, I mean, if you go back as far as Austin, they went 1-2. I mean, they're here to stay.
Yeah, so let's dive into those teams. We'll start bottom up. We'll start with Red Bull, work our way up to McLaren, because I want to look at some of those points that you mentioned, because I see them as key changes to this year and why it's different than last year. Starting with Red Bull, we mentioned this in the Drivers' Championship battle, but Red Bull brought upgrades that just didn't work this year. I don't know if that has to do with Newey signing his Aston Martin contract. You know, there could be something with that. Maybe they just got the formula wrong because they had to revert to some of their original parts on the season. So the Red Bull upgrades were slow coming out. They were wrong when they got put on. And maybe just now at the end of the season, we're seeing them find some more performance success, but it's not the Red Bull of past.
So that's just it. You nailed it earlier in one of your speculations. We saw an interview, I can't remember who it was with, or maybe it was a statement that was just made, but we saw where Red Bull specifically said, and I don't remember if it was Helmut Marko or Christian Horner, but one of them stated that they made a mistake earlier in one of the previous upgrades, and since then, or they didn't notice it because Max continued to win, and since then they added more upgrades to that, and everything's not gelling the way that they thought it would. So they had to dig back. back a couple upgrades to find the one where they had made the mistake, revert back to the original formula of the Red Bull car, and then come up with a new upgrade for that. I I can't tell you if it was side pods or if it was floorboard or what that was. I want to say it was side pods, but I can't say that with, full. Yes, that was definitely it. But wherever they made the mistake, they had to backtrack, fix that one part. And since then, we see a little bit of a resurgence from Max, which is great, but it's too little too late for the constructors. Or is it?
The other game changer to segue into that has been Sergio Checo Perez, who again last year was the best teammate. He was Valtteri Bottas to Lewis Hamilton levels of teammate greatness last year, winning the races that Max didn't win, minus the one that Carlos got. Dude, you can't argue with their performance last year.
Yeah,
You just can't.
minus the middle and second half of the season, but yeah,
Don't
sure.
worry about that. He did so good last year. Checo starts the year off pretty strong, gets a couple of second place finishes, gets a third place finish. But look, Checo hasn't been on the podium since Miami, which was the sixth. No, and he wasn't even on the race for that. So his last podium was China, which was the fifth race of the year. That was Checo's last podium. He's also not gotten points in 6 races. You're going to have a tough time competing for the constructors when your second driver doesn't get podiums after the 5th race and doesn't get points in 6 of those races.
We've talked about this in the past on a previous episode, and I think the point still stands. Red Bull is no longer the best car, and I don't even think it's the second best car. I genuinely think Ferrari and McLaren have a better car, and the only reason you're still seeing Max in this fight is because of who he is.
He's the best driver. We saw that in Sao Paulo going 17-1, pure skill. Some call it luck, Lando Norris, but it wasn't. That was skill. Anything else on Red Bull before we look at Ferrari?
I just think that they're going to have to take this one on the chin, honestly, for this season. Come back next season. Hopefully, Adrian Newey's loss isn't too big of a hit. Hopefully, they can put some stuff together and come back strong 2025. And even looking into the future, the 2026 rules, regulations changes. Maybe they get the formula right and they get right back on the ball and keep rolling forward. But they're definitely going to have to take this season, as far as the constructors goes, on the chin.
Yeah, and we'll give our predictions for the constructors finish at the end, but we'll save Red Bull there in their third spot with their struggles but recent success, minus Checo, because he hasn't had recent success. Looking at Ferrari, it's the complete opposite of Red Bull's story. Started the season off a little bit slow, had upgrades come in halfway through the season that were just fantastic, and then you have not one, but both of your drivers winning multiple races, doing incredibly well. You have Charles, who has always been a world-class driver. Again, his closest time coming in 2022 when he was battling Max for a good half of the season for the Drivers' Championship before Max pulled away. And then you have Carlos, who for a lot of the season was fighting for a seat. Because if you remember correctly, Lewis was announced as taking his Ferrari seat before the season even started.
Yeah.
And so Carlos had to fight for a seat, got race wins, eventually signs with Williams. I think after he signs with Williams, his Mexico Grand Prix win might have just been, hey, this is the last time I'm going to win a race. So let me go ahead and do that now while I have a chance in this Ferrari car. What are your thoughts on Ferrari?
Their story is pretty cool for this year, in my opinion. They've kind of always been hovering around the top, but never the top, and it seems like now they're bringing the fight. I mean, we look back to Austin, they go 1-2. We look back to Mexico, they go 1-3. And then in Sao Paulo, with the Carlos Sainz wreck out, that kind of hinders things. But Charles Leclerc still finished pretty moderately good in that race. I think he got, what did he get, 4th, 5th, something like that?
Yeah.
Regardless, we're going to see more from Ferrari for the rest of the season. And in my opinion, we're going to see them bring the fight to McLaren. We're going to see, as far as Red Bull, we're going to see Max hanging on for dear life up with these guys. But the fight is between McLaren and Ferrari at this point. And I'm really liking what I'm seeing from Ferrari. They have some insane pace. So I'm expecting a lot from them.
And I think Charles's performance has been very underrated this year, because a lot of talk has been about the McLaren drivers and how well McLaren has performed against the Red Bulls. Charles could very well finish second this year.
Yeah.
And again, if you asked me a couple of weeks ago, would Charles even be in the fight? It's like, no, because it's Lando and like Oscar and Max. Like, no.
Yeah.
But it's It's Charles' to lose at this point, realistically.
On top of
Look,
that, real quick
yeah, go ahead.
before you jump on, I just want to say, don't forget what the kid has done this season. He won his home race. The Monegasque won the Monaco Grand Prix. Then they travel and they go to Italy,
Well, first,
home
before
of
you go there,
Ferrari.
he had been tortured at Monaco.
Yeah, yeah, for like 5, 6 seasons, just terrible.
Yeah.
Not so good, but rewrote his story, comes out on top. The man jumps into the harbor. The greatest scene we've ever seen from racing, honestly. Then he goes to Italy, home of Ferrari, Monza, the Temple of Speed, takes the win, gives it to the Tifosi, the fans, lets them know that they're still here this season. And then, we see the Lando and Max show, and they kind of bounce back and forth for a little bit. And then Austin, they come out of nowhere, and Leclerc destroys the rest of the grid. Then we see the Mexico Grand Prix, Leclerc holding on to that third spot, bang, on the podium, and Carlos, first spot right there. This is a really great. It's a very warm story that Ferrari is putting together here in this entire tale, and you take it from the very beginning of the season until now.
And we did a lot of content on the United States Grand Prix, of course, because we went. So we did a lot of content leading up to it. We did a lot of content during there and after the United States Grand Prix. Ferrari wasn't, I mean, it was kind of on my radar because I think I put them finishing on the podium for that race, but
Yeah.
I didn't have them dominating like they dominated the US Grand Prix.
Yeah, no, that was unreal.
Watching it on TV is one thing, and maybe that's how every time Max wins by 20 or 30 seconds is. But when you're at a race and you see the Ferraris go by in pretty quick order, and then it's just dead silent, and then the rest of the field comes by, that is incredible. Okay, the team that sits on top with a comfortable-ish lead, but again, with the points available, that could quickly go away depending on how the next race, Las Vegas, goes. McLaren, 593 points. Both drivers have been outstanding this year. This isn't where we'll get into like the whole Lando versus Oscar thing, because yes, we kind of think that Oscar won a race that Lando should have won, but it doesn't matter when you're looking at the constructor standings because team got the points that they were going to get regardless. So it helped them out in that aspect. Maybe it hurt Lando's championship points for the drivers, but McLaren's had a year about as good as you could ask for McLaren, maybe minus like the last, I don't even know, 6 races outside of Lando winning in Singapore, where they kind of fell off getting first and second every race, and they were getting like third and fourth several times. And then now in Sao Paulo, Lando gets sixth. But what a change. 2023, this is where I think the change was made for them. They had a great back half of 2023, if you remember that. They were so far behind to Red Bull, it didn't matter, but they had a great back half of 2023. They more or less carried that momentum into 2024. It took them a little bit to get going, but once they got going,
a little bit.
Yeah.
I was just going to say they backed up a little bit in 2024 at the beginning, but they definitely refound their ground.
They did. And again, you mentioned it, I mentioned it. Lando getting that first win, game changer. And then 2, Oscar in the same season getting his first win. That puts your drivers in an entirely different headspace, because what did we hear after Lando won in Miami? Do you remember his end of the race radio messages with his engineers after he would get like second or third? How upset he was?
Yeah. After that race, yeah.
He used to be thrilled getting a podium at McLaren, and then he got that one win in Miami. He gets the win in the Netherlands. He gets the win in Singapore. And anytime he doesn't win now, this isn't acceptable.
Pure frustration. Yeah.
It's like Max not winning. It's what we hear. It's like, why are we even out here? What are we doing? The strategy was wrong. The car is bad. He rarely blames himself for driving, but
it's just crazy because we're talking about the same guy that when he would get second in the past, he would do his signature move on the podium where he would slam the champagne bottle into the ground and it would all fizz up into the air, and he'd go crazy. He famously broke the trophy for whatever race that was. But he's always just been this electric kid every time he got onto the podium. But you could almost get a sense that as he kept getting second, nearing the end, those last couple second places, he was still excited about, but you could tell he just wanted that first win. And then immediately when he gets that first win, every second place is like a slap in the face. Doesn't care, hates it. It's the funniest thing. But it's also exactly what the champions, I mean, the real top tier drivers' mindset is.
Think about Lewis in 2021. Every time he got beat out by Max, it was the
Yeah.
end of the world.
Yeah.
Because he saw the end of the road coming. He saw the points getting closer and closer every week. And he's like, what are we doing? We got to win every race. And now that's kind of the mindset that Lando has. We've got 3 races left. We've got Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. These tracks don't have a ton of history. These are all relatively ish. I mean, minus Abu Dhabi, newish races.
Last year was Qatar and Vegas's first year, wasn't it?
Qatar had been run before, like 2021, but then it
Right.
was off, and then
But
it
then it
came
was off
back. So
and then
yeah.
brought back last year.
So last year, Vegas, of course, Max wins. Charles got second in Vegas last year. And then Sergio got third. Looking ahead at Qatar, Max won. McLaren went second and third in Qatar last year.
Qatar's also where Oscar won his first ever race. It was a sprint race.
Interesting. So they know that track. And then finally, Abu Dhabi last year, Max won, Charles third, Oscar third. Or sorry, Charles second, Oscar third. So these are the teams that have been controlling these 3 races the past year.
And I'll tell you something that's more exciting than that. You're listing the people that won last year, but in reality, the fact of the matter is that every season is different, and it doesn't matter. What's really exciting is the fact that 2 of these races are on tracks that have wild variables. Las Vegas last year was insanely cold and it was new, and it's going to be a little bit more known this year, but they're still going to have to deal with the lack of grip last year that they had as they were skating around Las Vegas.
The quick run into a hairpin at turn 1, which we knew would be chaos, and it was chaos.
Yes, exactly. But also that now you're moving into Qatar, where it was the hottest event like ever last year, where you had drivers scraping themselves out of the car and then some immediately getting into ambulances, and it was bad, man. It was bad.
It's like a month and a half later this year, so maybe not as hot.
We'll hope.
But we'll see.
Hope. But
it's still Qatar.
It's still Qatar. It's still dusty, so there's still going to be a lack of grip in that aspect. So we have wild variables all around the next 2 races in particular. And then Abu Dhabi is always the wonderful send-off that it always is. It's always a gorgeous track at night with the lights on, and it's when the drama's turned up the most, besides, Max last year. But it's incredible. I'm so looking forward to these last 3 races of the year. I mean, we have variables into the great send-off. And the thing is that whatever happens in the next 2 races will determine the story that Abu Dhabi is going to tell. I mean, we saw Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen go into Abu Dhabi tied all the way to the decimal 0.5. And then so now it's like whatever happens in this race tells the whole story. It's the winner of the championship, whatever. So Las Vegas and Qatar is going to set up potentially an awesome storybook, whether is it going to be Leclerc or Norris for second? Is it going to be Norris or Verstappen for first? Is it going to be Ferrari in the first for the constructors, or is it going to be McLaren? I mean, there's so many stories that have yet to be told that could all culminate in the ending at Abu Dhabi this year.
Okay, you ready to give some predictions?
Let's do it.
You want to go first? You want me to go first?
I'll go first. You know what? Give me McLaren to win it all, but give me Ferrari to be like 5 points behind them, 3 points behind them, something crazy. I want to see it all matter in Abu Dhabi for the constructors. I want to see Abu Dhabi decide who wins the constructors, and I want it to be close, and that's what I'm expecting.
So you have it finishing, as it stands today, McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, but you have Ferrari making a go at it in Abu Dhabi.
I have Ferrari possibly winning the World Driver or the Constructors Championship, but not winning it.
I'm going to go the opposite direction. I think McLaren wins. I think that gap is significant enough. Their drivers are getting enough points. I think McLaren wins the Constructors Championship this year. I think the battle is for second. And hear me out. I think Red Bull, Max Verstappen, will pass Ferrari. He will win one of the next 3 races. McLaren will finish very high in the next 3 races, and Ferrari might just get pushed out of enough points. It's only 13 points right now.
With how well Sergio Perez is doing, you're basically saying that one of the
Take him
Ferraris.
out. I don't care. He could get no points.
You're basically saying either way. You're basically saying that one of the Ferraris DNFs in every single race for the rest of the season.
No, but they could finish 6th through 10th, and if Max wins a race and the McLarens are getting 2nd and 3rd, and Max gets 2nd in 2 of them, dude, he's passing him. It's 13 points.
But he's going against 2 drivers who are peaking right now.
Again, if Max gets 1st or 2nd in the final 3 races, McLarens get the other 2 positions, and Ferrari is outside of that, Max will pass them.
You realize the only reason we're not talking about it being Ferrari and McLaren for the final battle, and you're even mentioning Red Bull, is just because Carlos Sainz on a super slippery, all wet track crashed out, so he didn't get his full points. If Carlos Sainz finishes that race, then we're talking about Ferrari and McLaren, and I don't want to hear none of this Red Bull business.
I'm using 2 pieces of highly irrational logic to make this decision. 1, Max Verstappen is the greatest driver in the world, and he will find a way. 2, Ferrari will always be Ferrari. They will mess this up somehow. They haven't yet. They've run a pretty clean strategical season. They will mess this up.
I think for the first time in a very long time, we have a World Drivers' Champion from a 3rd best car on the grid.
Wow. Okay. Not the 4th best? You putting him ahead of Mercedes?
We already talked about that. Statistically, it's not possible. I'm sorry, Mercedes. I love Mercedes.
But in terms of car performance, though.
Oh,
now Mercedes has been pretty bad though recently.
I'd still say Red Bull's better.
Yeah, the last 4 races from Mercedes, they've hated that car.
That's been rough, man. They did something wrong. They brought some kind of upgrade and it ruined them.
They brought a downgrade. What a curveball.
We're going to make this season worse.
Let us know in the comments, what is your final 3 for the constructors? You have 3 teams to pick from. I guess you could put Mercedes in there, but you would be wrong. But what are your final 3? Let us know.
Guys, if you think that somehow we see a random turnaround in form for Sergio Perez and Red Bull starts making a comeback for the Constructors Championship, which is technically still mathematically possible, you're wrong. But man, that would be exciting.
He wins the last 3 races.
Yeah, and Max finishes 2nd.
Man. All right, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.